Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With us today, we have Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you this morning.
Good morning, Dr. Paul. How are you this morning?
Good. We're going to start off with maybe a bit of good news.
I think so.
At least maybe the treads. Verification of a statement I make generalized with my fingers crossed that there's a lot of people still supporting the principle of freedom and peace.
Yeah.
But they're badgered, they're intimidated, the media's against us, the government's against us, the welfare state's against them, the special interests are against it. And yet today, a poll that we've read about came up that sounds a little bit encouraging. And this was done by who did this poll?
Institute of Global Events.
Okay, and credible group, YouGov, are the pollsters.
Did the work, yeah.
So, but the big thing is, Americans want Ukraine talks.
Yeah.
We didn't want the war to start to have to work. Like I've always said, it's harder to stop a war than it is to start it.
Yes.
And we're pretty good at starting them. And we think we can control them and benefit by it, expand our empire, and never pay a penalty. But I think what's happening in the last couple of years, even you could argue even since the 60s, is systematically that attitude of us always benefiting financially will continue. No, it isn't the case, because we're losing our freedoms, we're losing the principles of the free market, we lost the control of a sound currency. So it's inevitable, although it doesn't happen overnight, because even in spite of all the corruption and waste and warmongering, the country's still pretty rich. But the big fallacy here is the wealth of this country is all based by calculating it by debt. And that's why it can't last, and that's why we to get people to think about these issues that this poll comes out with now, because they're starting to talk about the people and taking poll and finding out what the people think. But Americans want the talks, and they want some conditions on just passing out aid to Israel.
Yeah.
So there's a shift, even though there's always been some that didn't want to start, but the numbers, but they were complacent and apathetic about it and let it go ahead. But right now, I think it's something that happened during COVID. There was an awakening, and people got tired of that rather quickly because it hit me personally. But now I think the people are waking up, because once they see that this type of a foreign policy and this spending and borrowing has something to do with grocery bills.
Yeah.
And then they may become real alert to what we have to do.
Yeah, and polls are, obviously, we like them better when they go our way, and this one certainly did, I think, on a number of levels. Now, this was written up in Responsible Statecraft, and we got it off of antiwar.com. I think that's where we found it. But it's a good poll. Institute of Global Affairs, they teamed up, as you say, with YouGov to do the poll. They have done this for many, many years. It's kind of a barometer of opinion. Go to that first clip, because this is how Responsible Statecraft wrote it up. Poll: Americans want Ukraine talks and conditions on aid to Israel. They're split along party lines on a host of issues ahead of the elections. Now go to the next one. This is, I think, the operative paragraph here. A new poll finds that 66% of Americans want a NATO push for a negotiated settlement in the Ukraine war. And this is a surprise. Less than 24% believe that weapons and aid should be given to Israel unconditionally in its war on Gaza. And this, I would say, despite the massive propaganda in favor of what Israel's doing, you have a huge majority of the population that says, let's stop giving this free weapons because we're seeing the damage. And one of the things that struck me about this, Dr. Paul, is the incredible disconnect between the people who run Washington and the people who pay for the people who run Washington. Because even as this poll comes out showing those two things, today is the day where another $8 billion, when it was announced for Ukraine, and another $8.7 billion in military aid was announced for Israel on this very day. Almost $17 billion taken out from the America's pockets.
They have to live in a dreamland. In total denial. It'll catch up to them. They did express a little bit of a surprise But they said, interesting, it wasn't Ukraine, Gaza, and China that were the big issue. But they said just, they came up with there were more people, percentage-wise, not totally dramatic, that there was a lot of interest in immigration, climate change, and terrorism, which is understandable too.
Yeah.
It's a whole mess. So I was thinking, how do they sort this out? Sometimes they talk about the same thing in two different terms. And I said all of these things, whether it's Ukraine, Gaza, China, immigration, climate control, terrorism, it's all a reflection of excess intervention in a free society, which is what the Constitution asks for. So it's all together. It's the violation of those principles of seeking truth and following some rules and following, at least knowing what a natural law is.
Yeah. Well, here's another good, interesting statistic from this poll. If you can put the next one up. This really, this caught my attention, Dr. Paul, because it reaffirms really, go back one if you can. This reaffirms really the transition from the Democrats to being a war party. And we've seen from RFK, we've seen Tulsi Gabbard and many others who've quit the Democratic Party because they say it's a party of war. Now, this is according to this poll. According to other results, 58% of Harris supporters stated that the U.S. should maintain or increase the number of overseas troops, while 58% of Trump supporters think that number should decrease. So a solid majority of people who are in favor of Trump want us to start getting out of some of these places, and the majority who support Harris want us to go even deeper in. That's a real shift. And so this is probably the biggest good news thing in the poll. Some 75% of Americans agreed that the president should be required to obtain congressional approval before ordering any military action overseas, a check required by the Constitution, but increasingly ignored in the post-9/11 era.
You know, that sort of explains why I took a position like that by myself frequently, and everybody was amazed. Why doesn't it hurt you?
Yeah.
Maybe the people were thinking along these terms. It's great. But you know, when you were reading, referring about the 58% on Harris supporters, I wrote down progressives, anti-war people.
Yeah.
Where are they?
Yeah, they have nowhere to go.
Where are they? And but they are sorting it out. And as a matter of fact, I think that is what one of the benefits that there's the hint to is the division within the Republican Party.
Yeah.
And not that the neocons have had control of it all along, but now we're getting a segment of the Republican Party that are thought to be conservative are now talking and have a better voice now than the progressives.
Yeah.
The progressives are just lump them in with Harris.
Yeah.
So
it's true. I mean, they have nowhere to go, the progressives who are really anti-war. But it's kind of the same with people like us who are not on that side, because certainly we don't have a home in the Republican Party.
Right.
So the two of us should get together. But there's one other thing I wanted to bring up, and this is really the level of discussed with our Ukraine policy. If you put that next one up, another point of agreement among most Americans across party lines centers on the U.S. and NATO pushing for a negotiated settlement as a means to end the war. 70% of Republicans, 71% of independents, and 60% of Democrats marked support. So even among Democrats, a very solid majority are sick of this war. They want a negotiated settlement. And again, this is disconnect. Washington just doesn't seem to care.
You would think that if you have a moral standard that you should look at, you have the Constitution to look at it, you have to look at the practicality. Is it really working? And can we afford it? What do they have to defend this? And then what's your $17 billion they're going to announce it today?
Yeah, today.
And they can't wait to pass it out. And we're going to mention something else that they still don't have enough, so they have to steal a little bit too.
Yeah.
They steal a lot from the taxpayer. They print a lot, but they also steal in other ways that matters.
Exactly. Now this next story is from Politico, and I got the order a little wrong, so skip ahead to the plan to fund war and have a picture on it, and we can put that one up. Now we've talked about it before, it's been going on for a long time, Dr. Paul. They're trying to figure out how to give tons and tons more money to Ukraine, because of course they need to buy more Rolls Royces over there. But they came across this idea of, why don't we seize why don't we take all the Russian money that's been frozen and give it to Ukraine? They said, well, that's going to really mess up the global markets. Here's an idea. Why don't we just seize the interest from that money that's being held and use that for Ukraine? Of course, that's still stealing, if I come in and I take your interest. But put that back up. This is from Politico, I think today, and you sent this over. Plan to fund Ukraine war with Russian assets is down to the technicalities. Canadian lawmaker says this is Chrystia Freeland. She, I think, is still the foreign minister in Canada, or she's something like that. She is spearheading this idea to steal the interest and give it to Ukraine.
I often wondered, these are frozen assets.
Yeah.
But, I don't know the answer to that, but I have trouble believing they're really frozen. They just sit there in a cigar box?
Yeah.
Or are they in accounts? Is somebody making interest on it? I mean, what's going on? Because sometimes the longer we keep it, the more the American people think it's actually our money. And if you try to clean up the mess and say, look, we illegally took this money, we shouldn't have been involved in your little war, and here you didn't do what we told you, so we steal the money from you. And the American people now believe it's, you go to give it away, and the big example is Iran.
Yeah.
I know I know the quality of people there, but I also know the quality of some of the people in Washington.
Yeah.
And so all this money is taken, and she was optimistic that more money is going to be received this way.
Yeah.
So just freeze the accounts and make the people suffer themselves, pay for their own bombs that are killing them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, here's a little bit what Freeland is going on about. Go to the next one if you can. After Moscow, we talked about this already, invaded Ukraine in February of 22. Nations around the world froze some 280 billion in Russian sovereign assets. Freeland was a key figure behind persuading allies to take that step. So it's all this Chrystia Freeland woman. Western nations disagreed for years over whether to seize the assets outright, fearing unintended global consequences from an unprecedented move. So they landed upon this, we'll just take the interest from this money that we're holding, and that's her idea. Now go to the next one. This is interesting, Dr. Paul, though I have to bring this up. For Chrystia Freeland, the person who's spearheading this, I think it's the foreign minister of Canada, Politico reports, the fight is personal. Her family tree traces back to Ukraine. Okay, but they didn't say how it traces back to Ukraine. But this is kind of interesting. Go to the next one. This is from a few years ago, the Washington Post. Here's Chrystia Freeland. She's mad. She says Russia should stop calling my grandfather a Nazi, says Canada's foreign minister. And then about a week later, in the Ottawa Citizen, an article came out. Do the next one. Welp, turns out Chrystia Freeland's granddad was indeed a Nazi collaborator. So much for Russian disinformation. So Politico declines to tell us why her family roots go back there, because they were fighting on the side of Hitler. But it's just like with Victoria Nuland and Blinken. Now their families didn't fight on the side of Hitler. I think both of them were Jewish, so they're probably on the other side, receiving end of Hitler's nonsense. But nevertheless, they all have ties in Ukraine, and they're all controlling our policy on Ukraine. And it's like this idea, why don't you let go? You're in the West now. Why do you keep bringing these old historic battles?
In her statement, she says the fight is personal.
Yeah.
This is something very personal and very dear to her heart. But they never, when they do these kind of things, they try to, involve some personal thing or relative or whatever. But they never say it's when it's legitimate. They never talk about the loyalty to the U.S. Constitution, why we must do something, or loyalty to the principles of liberty.
Yeah.
No, and justice. No, those are the excuses. But if you can use something personal and make it sort of sentimental, it's my family, and I guess you sort of took care of that argument.
Yeah. I mean, if it's personal for her, I'm sure they will accept her into the military over there. Do your best. It's personal for her, so she steals from the rest of us.
It's also interesting as this money goes back for those frozen assets to loan to Ukraine.
Yeah, for the loan. Yeah.
I wonder if they have a good credit rating.
Yeah, exactly.
They do this, and they never blink an eye.
Yeah.
People say, "Oh, it's a loan. That's okay."
Yeah.
We steal it. We steal it from them. We hand it back to them. We loan it to them.
Loan it to Zelensky. Well, I guess the last one we want to talk about is kind of a bit of hypocrisy more than anything else. Now, this is written by Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. We saw it on Zero Hedge. I mean, it's just preposterous. Put that next one up if you can. U.S. to sanction former Georgian leader over opposition to NATO membership. Now, this is the country, Georgia, and this is the former Prime Minister, Ivanishvili, who basically, he hasn't been in politics in 10 years or so, but he says, you know what, I don't think joining NATO was really a good idea for us. And so the U.S. put sanctions on him because he said that.
He is an individual.
Yeah, he's a regular guy. He's a regular guy.
So it's, but the whole thing is, when somebody sees the leakage of some of our empire, they have to say something. You better be careful. So we can punish you even if you're out of office sitting around fishing, but we're going to sanction you and steal your bank account.
Yeah.
Prevent you from using it. So I think it's a ridiculous thing. And I think sometimes all you have left on this, because people won't listen to the logic, is just how ridiculous it is to make fun of it.
Yeah,
It really becomes so silly. But it's also very dangerous that we throw our weight around. But it's also another point of us throwing it out there. Who's the boss?
Yeah, who's the boss?
You're the boss. Even with an incident like that, it's maintaining the empire, and we are the boss, less so than we used to be.
Yeah.
So people will quit listening to us as time goes on.
Now, the hypocrisy is like, you can have any foreign policy you want as long as it's the one we want you to have, and that's what it is. Now, you're sitting over there in Georgia, you're very close to Russia. You may, in this interesting that parallels with Ukraine, because that's what Yanukovych did. He's like, okay, I'm next door to Russia. I'm Ukraine. We've been trading for decades. We've been trading for centuries, in one form or another. So I'm not sure I really want to ditch everything to go only in the EU and turn my back on Russia. Can I just trade with both? Would that be okay? And so the U.S. then puts in the coup.
Well, it was said during the height of the power of the Soviet state, they were always for peace on their terms.
Yeah.
As long as they could do it.
That's how we are.
It's sort of like how some of these setting up the debates in this country. Yeah, I'm all for a debate on my terms and set up the rules so the rules count. So all I can say is there is such a thing as truth, and there's such a thing as people making nihilism their religion. And there's a contest going on. It's been going on for as long as history has existed. And yet I think it's going to continue. So when there's a recognition, because once again, I think the majority of the people of the world would say yes. I think even when it was very, very primitive, yes, they fought and fought over their homesteads and things like that. But I think most people didn't like the idea, even in ancient times, of just slaughter.
Yeah.
But now, boy, look at what's going on. People are conditioned for it. When you think of the slaughter that's been going on for the last 150 years. It's bigger. It was big in the old days, percentage-wise, when a lot of people died. But now, when you look at it and look at the power, that's why this trying to provoke Russia right now, and we're giving them missiles that will reach in the muscle. And Putin, I don't know if the American politicians are recognizing what he's saying. And I think he's probably, in this sense, a man of his word. I don't think he's just talking. And I think very, very dangerous. And yet the answer is not that difficult. Let's live in peace. I was toying with an idea the other day. How did we ever break over and have an opening when Nixon and Kissinger went to China? Do you remember what they did, and how I am always positive about sports? They started playing ping pong.
Yeah, exactly.
And I thought, well, that's crazy. That's silly. These people are ready to kill each other. But it really was an opening. And just think of how much trade we do with people and trading back and forth. So it's something that I think we should do more of it. But they would laugh at us right now if we say, you know what we ought to do? Why don't we have a soccer match with Iran?
Yeah.
Do you think the American people would go along with that? No, they're not going to do it. Maybe there'll be
People
some.
would, yeah. Yeah.
But put it on neutral ground.
Yeah. Well, that's why the first thing that they did with Russia is they banned them from the Olympics. You can't play the Olympics. And now I think I just read just yesterday they banned them from international chess competition, you know. So it's the opposite of what you say. It's trying to keep them out of sports.
I better be quiet.
Yeah. Anyway, so I'm going to close out, Dr. Paul. I'm getting ready to leave town. And if you put on that last clip, I mentioned it on Monday. Maybe I mentioned it on Tuesday. But I'm going to participate in the Rage Against the War Machine rally at the Washington Monument. I'm really looking forward to it. A lot of great folks are going to be there. If you are in the area, I'm going to be there on Saturday. I think it goes on all day Saturday. I'm going to be speaking in the afternoon. Would love to see anyone who's there come up and say hi. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Paul.
Very good. You know, in our little talk today, we talked about a lot of different things that our government does, and yet in the polling they showed that people were still concerned about borders and some domestic things and inflation and this sort of thing. And I got to thinking, when you put all these together, you know, the problem is intervention, because the authority to intervene in the personal lives of citizens, the authority for the government to assume everything you earn belongs to the government, and the government has an obligation to make sure you don't waste it and to tell you how you can spend it. And the government is going to tell you how to exchange goods and services, because somebody might cheat. So we have to have prior restraint. We have to dictate all the regulations. People might lie in the newspaper, so we have to have prior restraints there. So we have to sort of, get rid of the First Amendment. But everything is intervention, and because they base it on the fact that the people who want to intervene believe that they are superior and that they can win the people over because the people can't take care of themselves. Well, more and more people are starting to realize the government doesn't do a very good job. And hopefully that'll wake people up and make the assumption that we, the people, can take care of ourselves a lot better than the government. All you have to do is look at the invasion of the federal government into our medical system, and you'll find out that private medicine can take care of patients a lot better than the bureaucrats and the pharmaceutical industries. So I vote for non-intervention. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.